My name is Cecilia Gaposchkin. I am a medieval historian, a professor in the history department. My specialty is medieval European history of the later Middle Ages, which encompasses the period when the Black Death, the bubonic plague, hit in Europe. And I have agreed to participate happily in this class. It's been an interesting experience for me to revisit the scholarship and the narrative, particularly in the current environment. So this and a few small units. I'm going to be responsible for the unit on the Black Death. And what I'm going to do here is break up the lectures into a series of smaller chunks, into a series of mini lectures, and I'm hoping to keep each of them, in fact, quite short. As I have them set up right now, we'll begin with a basic narrative of the arrival of plague to Europe and what happened, and then we will have a short lecture on the disease itself, and then I want to discuss the religious responses and interpretations, and then we'll spend a bit of time looking specifically at the way in which Jews were scapegoated and accused of being responsible for the arrival of plague in Europe. We'll look at the medical responses. I want to look at the responses in art and culture, and then a short discussion of the longer-term economic and social impact. I'm hoping to keep these to, around 10 minutes or under. We'll see how long they take, but I know from my own experience that watching these PowerPoint lectures are difficult. They're very different than having a classroom lecture, and they're harder also to be engaging for long periods of time, in part because we do not have the energy of an active classroom. Each mini lecture will have an associated reading taken with it, one or two readings. They'll be fairly short. I've taken these from this extremely useful collection of readings and source material. Dates from '94, but the material is extremely apropos, and the commentary is still useful. I will be referring to these lectures in each of the little segments, and it would be helpful if you had read them before. They're short, and I suspect you'll find them pretty interesting. What we're going to do is look and narrate the event of the Black Death, which in fact lasted for centuries. It emerged in the 1330s, and it struck Europe first in 1347, devastated much of Christendom, the Islamic world, and the Mongol Empire. And in Europe, it came back every 11 years pretty regularly, and then after a century or so, every 12 or 13 years, up through the 17th century. So we're really talking about a massive phenomenon. But in this small set of lectures, we're really going to concentrate mostly on the early phase and the European phenomenon, partly because of my own training, but also partly because the narrative that we'll see is the one that's really been pinned down, that's been mostly studied. It's the best known piece, but it is only one small piece of a much longer history. So before I end this first little lecture, a mini lecture, let me just invite you to think about what would happen if COVID was going to kill off half of our society. This is what happened in Europe between 1347 and 1351. The best modern estimates we have are that bubonic plague killed between 40 and 55% of the entire population of Europe. In England, for which we have reasonable demographic information, the numbers seem to be between 40 and 60% of the population. This means that about half of the population of England died over the period of about 18 months. I want you to think for a minute about what this would mean. Think of your dorm, say, or your household, or your hometown, and now remove from that imagination 1 out of every 2 people. Let's do it this way. Think about the classes you were taking 18 months ago, whether you were in college or whether you were still at home, and then imagine that half of those people had died. Not that they just never had existed, but that they had died and the effects that that had had on their community. What would that do to you? So, on the most immediate, what would it make you think of your own sense of security and your own mortality? Maybe your family's economic position. How would you make sense of it? What would you be interested in thinking or doing? Would you still want to watch Westworld and Game of Thrones, or would there be something else you'd want to watch? Were TV shows even being made anymore? Would you take solace in religion and faith, or would that be a framework that you would use to help understand the events? Or would it make you question the existence of a just God, or would it make you try to figure out the relationship between your understanding of God and your understanding of science? On the other hand, you might want to imagine what it might do to your job prospects once you graduated from college. Would it be maybe easier to get an apartment in New York City upon graduation, and maybe that apartment would cost a lot less because there were many fewer people who wanted to rent it? And then imagine that this all happened 11 years on again. So that is what the phenomenon that occurred in Europe between 1347 and 1351, and it had massive impact on European society. It has been called the Great Transition, and the event that transformed the West. So we'll unpack that. Okay, thanks. Bye.